ADX Florence houses some of the deadliest criminals America has ever known. But there's one group that stands apart: gang leaders whose names alone send shockwaves through the prison. They operate in the shadows, pulling the strings and controlling everything. These men don't just survive, they dominate. Fear doesn't just follow them, it surrounds them. And even the toughest inmates know better than to cross them. Welcome to the Alcatraz of the Rockies, a place where some of the most violent criminals in the United States are kept isolated from the world. But what happens when these men, already notorious for their brutal past, start to form alliances? When they join forces, wreak havoc, and slowly take control of the prison from within? ADX Florence isn't just any maximum security facility. It's a world where survival is a daily battle, a place where even the most dangerous criminals aren't just locked away, they're pulling the strings, orchestrating fear, and ruling behind bars. In this place, strength means something different. Here, it's not just about being tough. It's about influence, about how much control you can gain over the system. And that's what makes these men so terrifying. Let's take a closer look at what makes them so dangerous, how they got here, and what keeps them at the top of the food chain. At number 5, we have Thomas Silverstein, a notorious figure in the world of high-security prisons. Silverstein's violent history includes the deaths of multiple correctional officers, earning him a reputation as one of the most feared individuals ever held at ADX Florence. His criminal acts were brutal, and he was convicted of killing 3 correctional officers while incarcerated. For these violent actions, he spent decades in solitary confinement, where he was known to be a constant threat. Silverstein's notoriety at ADX Florence kept the entire facility on edge. His ruthlessness made even the most hardened criminals wary of crossing him. Despite being in isolation, his gang affiliations ensured he maintained influence. His intelligence, calm demeanor, and methodical approach to violence made him even more dangerous. He was able to control inmates and manipulate the environment around him without ever raising his voice. The terror he instilled in the prison system lived long after his death in 2019. Silverstein's violent legacy and his ability to dominate, even in isolation, made him one of the most dangerous inmates in the country. At number 4, we have Terry Nichols, one of the masterminds behind the Oklahoma City bombing, one of the deadliest acts of domestic terrorism in U.S. history. Nichols, alongside Timothy McVeigh, was responsible for the 1995 bombing that killed 168 people, including 19 children. This horrific act earned him a sentence of life in prison, and he was later transferred to ADX Florence due to the high-profile nature of his crime. Though Nichols was not affiliated with any specific prison gang, his violent ideology and his involvement in the bombing made him one of the most dangerous inmates at ADX Florence. His methodical and cold approach to violence, driven by a radical belief system, ensured that he was a constant threat, both inside and outside of prison. His presence at ADX Florence was marked by intense security and close monitoring, as authorities feared his potential to radicalize others, even from within the prison walls. His dedication to his cause made him a dangerous figure, whose legacy of destruction is still felt to this day. At number 3, we have Michael Swango, a former doctor who turned his medical knowledge into a deadly weapon. Swango's criminal activities included poisoning and murdering both patients and co-workers over the course of his career. As a licensed doctor, he was able to carry out his murders under the guise of his medical expertise, making the deaths appear accidental or natural. Swango's time at ADX Florence was marked by his disturbing calm and intelligence. His ability to manipulate others was just as potent in prison as it was in his career as a doctor. His presence at ADX Florence served as a chilling reminder of how a calm, calculated mind can be just as dangerous as physical violence. Even in the most secure facility, Swango remained a constant threat. His intelligence and ability to remain undetected allowed him to carry out his crimes with minimal suspicion. His cold, calculating nature made him one of the most dangerous men in the prison system, and his time at ADX only cemented his reputation as a master manipulator. At number 2, we have James Whitey Bulger, the notorious leader of the Winter Hill Gang. Bulger's reign of terror stretched far beyond the streets of Boston and continued even behind the high-security walls of ADX Florence. Bulger's criminal career included numerous murders, extortion, and organized crime. He was one of the FBI's most wanted fugitives for years before his eventual capture. Once incarcerated at ADX Florence, Bulger's influence didn't dissipate. Even though he was older and less physically imposing by the time he arrived, his ability to manipulate both inmates and guards was unmatched. Bulger had a reputation for controlling entire rooms without ever speaking. His ties to organized crime and his reputation as a cold, calculating criminal made him a dangerous figure behind bars. His manipulative nature and his ability to maintain connections to the outside world made him a threat, even from within the confines of ADX Florence. Finally, at number 1, we have Richard Reed, also known as the Shoe Bomber. In December 2001, Reed attempted to detonate explosives hidden in his shoes aboard an American Airlines flight, an act that would have resulted in mass casualties. His plot was foiled by the passengers, but the terror he intended to inflict was very real. Reed was sentenced to life in prison and transferred to ADX Florence due to the severity of his crime. His ideologies, rooted in radical extremism, made him one of the most dangerous men in U.S. federal custody. Even in ADX Florence, his connections to radical groups remained a concern. Reed's violent ideology and his commitment to carrying out terror attacks meant that he was a constant threat, not only to those inside the prison but to society at large. His time at ADX Florence served as a reminder of just how dangerous individuals can be when they are driven by extreme beliefs. At number 5, we have Thomas Silverstein. Convicted of murdering 3 correctional officers, Silverstein's reputation for violence is legendary. His actions have made him a constant threat, even in isolation. Silverstein's calculated violence and cold demeanor earned him a place among the most dangerous inmates in ADX Florence. But as dangerous as Silverstein is, there's another inmate whose power isn't just about violence. He controls the entire prison through manipulation and fear. Let's take a look at gang member 4, and wait until you hear how he's able to pull the strings, even from behind bars. Silverstein was sent to solitary confinement after each of his killings, but that didn't stop him from maintaining a stranglehold on the prison system. His time in isolation allowed him to control his environment through sheer intimidation and manipulation. It didn't matter that he was locked behind concrete walls, his very name carried power. He didn't need to engage in physical violence anymore. His reputation was enough to command respect. Inmates knew better than to cross him. Even the most hardened criminals knew that Silverstein's calm and calculating demeanor made him a more dangerous adversary than any violent outburst could. It was that quiet, methodical nature that allowed him to maintain influence, even in the most isolated conditions. His chilling silence was more menacing than a shouting match, and his ability to control the flow of power in the prison from a cell was a testament to just how lethal his presence was. At number 4, we have Richard Reed. He might not be a gang leader in the traditional sense, but his actions place him among the most dangerous individuals ever held at ADX Florence. Known to the world as the Shoe Bomber, Reed attempted to bring down a transatlantic flight in 2001 by detonating explosives hidden in his shoes. Though his plan failed, it was enough to get him sentenced to life in prison. And it was in ADX Florence, one of the most secure facilities on the planet, that his dangerous ideologies became a source of fear and unrest. Reed was not just a terrorist, he was a symbol of radical extremism, and that made him even more dangerous inside prison. His unshakable commitment to his cause and his violent beliefs turned him into a highly volatile figure. His presence in ADX Florence wasn't just about keeping him locked away, it was about containing a man whose influence reached beyond the walls of the prison. He didn't need to raise a hand in anger to pose a threat. Reed's ideology was a time bomb waiting to go off, and his ability to manipulate others made him a dangerous figure. Even in the darkest corners of ADX, Reed continued to spread his dangerous views. His isolation didn't stop him from trying to recruit others to his cause. His quiet determination and unwavering beliefs made him a formidable figure, and even behind bars his presence was felt. At number 3, we have James Whitey Bulger, a man whose infamy reached far beyond the narrow confines of ADX Florence. Bulger was a man of contradictions. On one hand, a ruthless criminal mastermind, and on the other, a quiet, calculating manipulator. As the head of the Winter Hill Gang, Bulger was responsible for a laundry list of crimes including extortion, drug trafficking, and a series of brutal murders. For years, he was one of the FBI's most wanted fugitives, and his eventual capture brought an end to a reign of terror that spanned decades. But even when Bulger was locked away in ADX Florence, his reach was far from over. In his later years, Bulger may have been physically weaker, but his reputation still commanded respect, and his ability to manipulate people was as sharp as ever. He didn't have to fight his way to power, he had built a criminal empire by exploiting the weaknesses of others. Inside the walls of ADX Florence, Bulger still carried the aura of a man who could make or break careers. He wasn't just feared by the inmates, his control over people. His ability to manipulate guards and other prisoners was legendary. Even in isolation, Bulger's criminal empire didn't crumble. He continued to exert influence, pulling strings from behind the bars of his cell. His ability to control everything, even from a distance, made him a constant and ever-present threat to anyone who crossed his path. His power lay not in the violence he could commit, but in the chaos he could orchestrate with a few well-placed words. At number 2, we have Michael Swango, a man whose calm demeanor disguised the mind of a cold-blooded killer. Swango's background as a medical doctor made him a unique and deeply disturbing figure in the world of crime. His career as a serial killer is unlike anything you'll hear in a typical true crime story. Swango used his medical knowledge as a weapon, poisoning patients and co-workers, hiding his murders behind the veneer of his professional career. He was able to kill without detection for years, using his medical expertise to mask his deadly actions. By the time Swango was sent to ADX Florence, he had already claimed the lives of multiple victims, and his ability to go undetected for so long made him one of the most dangerous individuals in the U.S. prison system. Even in the highly controlled environment of ADX Florence, Swango continued to be a threat. His intelligence was his most dangerous weapon. He didn't need to resort to physical violence. His ability to manipulate and control those around him was enough to make him one of the most feared men in the prison. Swango's silence and unnerving calm made him the kind of threat that didn't announce itself. He could sit in a room full of people and remain the deadliest person there, not because he raised his voice or shouted commands, but because he knew exactly how to use people to his advantage. And finally, at number 1, we have Terry Nichols. His name is tied to one of the deadliest acts of domestic terrorism in American history, the Oklahoma City bombing. Alongside Timothy McVeigh, Nichols was responsible for the bombing that killed 168 people, including 19 children. It's hard to overstate just how brutal and devastating this attack was, and Nichols' role in it made him a prime target for ADX Florence. Though Nichols was not a gang member in the traditional sense, his actions, his connections, and his radical ideology placed him at the very top of the list of the most dangerous prisoners in America. Inside ADX Florence, Nichols was kept in isolation, but his influence was still deeply felt. His violent belief system was so ingrained in his mind that it continued to pose a security risk, even in one of the most controlled environments in the world. Nichols wasn't just dangerous because of what he did, he was dangerous because of what he represented. His radical ideology had the potential to inspire violence even in the most secure prisons. Nichols was a man who didn't back down from his convictions, and that made him a constant security threat. His time at ADX Florence wasn't about keeping him away from society, it was about ensuring that his violent beliefs didn't spread beyond the prison walls. Nichols showed that even in a place like ADX Florence, some men are capable of wreaking untold havoc, not with weapons or violence, but with the strength of their ideologies and the belief that they are on a mission. In the harsh and unforgiving halls of ADX Florence, time moves differently. Every step you take is a reminder that this is a prison, it's a place where the very air feels heavy, charged with tension and danger. The concrete walls close in around you, a constant reminder that there's no escape. Every inch of the facility is built to isolate, to control, to break you down. Here, the only thing more constant than the silence is the low hum of surveillance cameras, the clicking of locks, and the deafening slams of steel doors that echo down endless corridors. You see, inside these walls, the very design of the prison is part of the punishment. No windows, no sunlight, nothing to distract the mind from the brutal reality of captivity. And yet, even in the most remote corners, you can feel it, the presence of men whose power stretches far beyond their cells. These are not ordinary inmates. These are the men who command fear with a single glance, whose very names send tremors through the ranks of the prison. Inmates here don't fear physical violence, they fear the whispers. The rumors, the way certain names seem to carry weight in the air, even when spoken in hushed tones. These are the men who can bring chaos with a single word, who hold sway over the prison but also over the lives of everyone within it. There's a particular kind of terror that comes from knowing someone has the ability to strike without warning, to manipulate and control without ever needing to raise a hand. In ADX Florence, it's not the steel doors that keep you locked in, it's the knowledge that some men have the power to make the very walls feel like they're closing in around you. When you walk these halls, the tension is suffocating. Every movement is watched. Every step is calculated. You never know who might be lurking just beyond your line of sight. The fear is not of physical violence, it's the psychological grip these gang leaders hold over the minds of the men around them. Their reputation alone is enough to keep the entire prison on edge, waiting for something to snap. The silence is oppressive, thick with dread, and even the most hardened inmates know to tread carefully. One wrong word, one glance in the wrong direction, and the consequences could be dire. Inmates in ADX Florence have no hope of blending into the crowd. There is no crowd. The air is thick with isolation. Each man here is a prisoner of his own mind as much as he is of the system. But some, like the men we've talked about, have learned to harness the power of that isolation. They've learned to dominate through physical intimidation, but also through psychological warfare. They use fear, manipulation, and control to shape the prison's power dynamics, to get others to do their bidding, to make themselves untouchable. The psychological terror they instill isn't about their violent actions, it's about their presence. Even in solitary confinement, their influence lingers like a shadow. The men in these cells know they cannot escape their reach, not because of the high walls, but because these gang leaders have found ways to crawl under their skin, to control their thoughts, to make them afraid even when there's no immediate threat. They've perfected the art of dominance through their physical power and the mind games they play. And in a place like ADX Florence, where isolation is a constant companion, the mind games are what make these men truly dangerous. The other inmates, the ones who haven't earned a spot at ADX Florence, they can only wonder what it's like to feel that kind of power, to be the one everyone else fears, to know that you are the center of attention even when no one dares speak your name aloud. Every moment spent in the same facility as these gang leaders feels like a threat hanging in the air, a sense of unease that no one can quite shake. Every glance, every word, every shift in posture is calculated. Every move is a potential act of defiance that could come with catastrophic consequences. As the days drag on, you begin to realize that in a place like this, survival isn't about avoiding violence. It's about maintaining control of your mind. These men, these gang leaders, they don't threaten your body, they threaten your very sanity. They chip away at your peace of mind, creating a tension that never fades. They are the unseen forces that make the walls feel even thicker, the air even harder to breathe. And inside the fortress that is ADX Florence, that's the kind of power that makes them truly untouchable. Now, as we've seen the power and fear these men hold over ADX Florence, I want to know, who do you think is the most dangerous? Which gang member truly rules the prison in your eyes? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let's see who you think deserves the top spot. Is it the one whose name shakes the walls of the facility? Or maybe the one whose influence runs deeper than anyone could have imagined? You've heard their stories, but did any of these criminals surprise you? Were you shocked by the level of control and fear they wielded? If you want to hear more about the nation's most dangerous prisons and the criminals who terrorize them, make sure to subscribe, like, and hit the bell so you never miss another story. And before we wrap up, tell us, who do you think is the deadliest gang leader of all time? Share your thoughts and join the conversation. At number 5, we have Thomas Silverstein. Convicted of murdering 3 correctional officers, Silverstein's reputation for violence is legendary. His actions have made him a constant threat, even in isolation. Silverstein's calculated violence and cold demeanor earned him a place among the most dangerous inmates in ADX Florence. Next, at number 4, we have Terry Nichols, the mastermind behind the Oklahoma City bombing. Nichols' involvement in the bombing, which claimed 168 lives, earned him a life sentence and a transfer to ADX Florence. His radical ideology, combined with his cold, methodical approach to violence, makes him one of the most dangerous individuals in the facility. Even in isolation, Nichols' influence remains, as his deep convictions and calculated nature continue to shape his legacy of terror. These men don't just survive behind bars, they rule the prison with an iron fist. The walls of ADX Florence were built to break them, to isolate them, but what they've done in return is far worse. They've bent the prison to their will. They've made it a place where their power extends beyond the concrete, beyond the bars, and beyond the guards. And yet, we're left with one chilling question: how much influence do they really have outside these walls? Sure, they're locked away in maximum security, but we can't forget, these are the men who have already shown the world what they're capable of. Some of them were masterminds of terror, pulling strings across entire countries. Others, like the men we've looked at today, built empires from inside their cells. Are the most dangerous criminals locked up in ADX Florence? Or are they still out there, waiting, watching, and planning their next move?